Alright, for those of you that are here specifically for the Vaders and you don't want to listen to me blab about my process on how I came to this solution, this is basically a breakdown of all the wire colors that they use in the 2022s, at least for sure. You got the blue and the white. Mind you, this is your 9-pin harness coming off of the bike, and this is the transmission, the 6-pin harness coming off of the bike, between the bike and the speedometer. So the blue and white is the RPM sensor. The black is a positive feed from the battery. I think it's also the switch that allows you to actually, allows the bike to light. It'll turn over without disconnected, but just won't start. Light blue is your right turn. Dark blue is your high beam indicator. Orange is the low beam, orange is the left turn indicator. Red is just your 12-volt battery constant feed. Yellow and white is actually the fuel sender, and green is your ground as usual. And then you got the trans harness where it dumbed down to green and red is for neutral. Pink was first. Yellow with the green stripe was second gear. Yellow with the black stripe was third gear. Yellow and red was the fourth gear. And then the brown and white wire, I have no clue what it's for, but there was another spare wire on this specific speedometer that it connected to, and everything works just fine. So whatever it is, it mates up with the other unknown wire on the bike side, or on the speedometer side, but yeah. Anyways, if that's all you needed, congratulations, you have what you need. Go nuts. If you want to hear kind of how I did my deductions to find these and how you can do it if you're working with a different bike, different speedometer, vice versa, grab some popcorn and kick back. This might take a little bit. Alright folks, so here's basically the whole troubleshooting section. I'll apologize if this is kind of short, but I just got off a ride on this thing. Keep this filed away for later, but on those SAMDO Gen 1 clone speedometers, the factory calibration is like 35. I believe it's 1 for the fuel. You want to keep it at that 1. That 100 ohm resistance is perfect. The 5, you won't get any fuel readouts, so keep that at a 1. And then the pulse, you keep it 2 because these are single cylinder bikes, but that 35, or whatever number starts out with, is a little bit off. At low speeds below 10 miles an hour, it lines up perfectly, which is better than the stock one, but anything above that, it still gives you a 5 to 7 mile per hour difference. I'm probably going to have to crank that to, I'm thinking, a 37 or a 39, possibly, from what I've heard. But anyways, so here's the whole setup. As you can see, I may have mentioned, if I edit this right, there's the SAMDO $10 universal mount kit, as they call it. It's a piece of shit, really. I got this thing hanging out here where if this thing goes in a nose slide, I'm going to lose the speedometer, but I've got some bracket kits I'm going to use to try and fancy that up. It's a couple of pieces off some old U-bolts that might be a little bit shorter, but anyways, here's all the harnesses. I tucked them back in this like rubber sock. That's a part of the setup. But the 3 you got to worry about are right in here. It's obviously the ones connected to the speedometer leash here. Is this 6-pin, this 3-pin to the speed sensor, which, as I covered in the part with the paperwork, don't mess with the alignment of anything if you get this specific speedometer. It tells you to switch this blue and black wire. Don't do it. It's a trap. You won't get any speed reading. However, you plug it in the way it is and ignore the instruction manual, thing works great. Anyways, you got that. You got the 6-pin transmission, then you got the 9-pin one that's for everything else, which is right here. Now, as I said, you're going to have to rearrange the factory, or the speedometer's factory wiring harness. Same wires work, you just got to kind of rearrange them. Now, for the troubleshooting, what I used is I had this stock speedometer still plugged in, so I wanted to figure out what the values of this are. And I knew for a fact that with this 6-pin, which is the transmission, all the wires were properly lined up with something. You could plug in this one straight out of the box, and literally it would tell you nothing because you'd be messing with a bunch of wires that you don't know goes to what alignment. But anyways, so what I did here, especially with this, is I looked at most of the manuals online for a bunch of universals and a bunch of just stock bike speedometers that I could find. Of course, you can find every bike but this one online. But I noticed that it tends to start in, I believe it's neutral or first in one of the corners, and then it works its way around one direction or the other. Obviously, with this one, it's going to exclude one of these bottom ones most likely because this is only a four-speed bike. There's only 4 gears plus neutral. It leaves you an extra slot. However, there is a brown and white wire on the factory harness up in there that I don't know what it goes to, and there's a yellow and white one here. I don't know what that goes to, but they both plug into the same hole and the thing works with them, so whatever it's useful for, they line up. Anyways, what you're going to want to get a hold of is a set of these. I think they're called terminal keys or something like that. I got this set off of Wish, and I've got a couple of simple ones that have the one you need plus like one of these fork ones and one of these ring ones coming in the mail. I got about 5 of them. I'm probably going to sell them on eBay for cheap for guys like us that need them. Anyways, the one I used, I believe, is this one. The biggest one. Or at least the fattest one as far as the point goes. Now, the way these work is, when you pull these apart, this is just the transmission harness. You got what looks like this. Now, that little slot right there on the top, you can see how they're rectangle and they got a little notch on the side of each of them. That's where that pin goes. You take this thing, you jam it in that little notch, like right here per se. I'll go in front of this one for the heck of it. And then when you jam it in there, see how it's pushed in? When you jam it in there and you kind of wiggle the wire back and forth, now you got to be patient with these. You don't want to go hog on it, or else you'll either bend your pin setup or you'll bend the living hell out of the terminal. But just kind of in and out, wiggle the wire. Eventually you'll see this one actually sink a little bit deeper into here than the rest of them are. That means that you got it disconnected, and then you can literally pull it out by the wire. Now, what you want to do is, if you're troubleshooting this, trying to figure out what your bike setup is, basically what you'll want to do is pull one of these corner ones, then start up the bike and look at your indicator. If it still says neutral, then obviously you didn't hit the neutral one. Then you're going to want to do the thing where you kind of rock your bike back and forth without starting it, and then shift it into first. If you don't get any readout for first gear on the display, that means you found first gear. So then you're going to want to write down whatever color that wire is. These are all black, we'll get to that in a second, but you'll want to write down whatever color wire that was with first, plug it back in, and then just to double verify, pull the next wire over and see what disappears. Now in theory then either neutral will not show up on the speedometer or second won't show up on the speedometer. Whichever one doesn't show up, then you've kind of got an idea of which direction it's going. I believe it'll usually go neutral first, second, third, fourth, and then a blank. At least that's, I believe, the way it is on the bike. When I go over the paperwork you'll see for sure. But the reason of this black harness is this stupid speedometer came with a female here, and then the bike's harness is also a female. So I had to create a little jump harness, and I figured, well, I'm going to get these all lined up to where they need to be, so it doesn't matter if these are different colors. And I didn't have any stock wire of different colors, so I just slotted one together. And the way I did that is with this. I pulled this kit off of eBay for about 10 bucks. It's got, the main breadwinner of this is it's got all those little terminals, which you can't seem to find anywhere at any auto shops. It was like super skinny pin style and the female half of that pin style. Those could come in handy if you're doing a rear fender delete as well, because that's the kind of connections you need if I remember right. Don't know where you find those barrel plugs. If anybody finds out, let me know in the comments. But then you've got a bunch of these. Now, these little 3s might come in handy if you end up jacking up your speedometer harness trying to get it to work, or your speed sensor I should say. These 2s, I don't really know where those would go. I think there might be one coming off of the fuse block. Same with these 4s, there's got to be one around there somewhere, but the main reason I bought this kit was for, yeah, it's jumping on me, the 6 pins. Now this is basically a perfect plug and play for those Chinese style terminals to make that jump harness. So I just took 2 of those, a handful of the female connections, and about 2 feet of junk wire, and just threw her in there. It also comes with a bunch of the female terminals as well. So once again, if you're messing around with different speedometers trying to find the one you like, I'd suggest investing in a kit like this, because even maybe pay the 15 bucks and get the one with the 9 pins, because these things are not indestructible. If you're unplugging and plugging them back in, you're going to wear the plastic clips out, or you're going to bust the terminals out of their little plastic seats in there, so you're going to want extras. And for 10-15 bucks, it's probably the cheapest bike part you can get for these damn things that you could use in the long run in a variety of uses. Great, now the little fucker won't close. Alright, give me a second here, folks. I don't like leaving shit half done because I'll forget about it and then I'll spill it all over the place later. Alright, there we go. Anyway, so basically, terminal kit, pin puller for the terminal wires. Those are the 2 basic tools you're going to want for this job. Like I was saying with the transmission harness is basically pull the wires until you don't see the readout on the display anymore, and then work your way from there. Anybody with enough common sense and enough mechanical know-how will basically figure out from just that description as they go. They'll find a way to tweak it to make it their own, and they'll probably end up doing it the same way I did. Anyways, I'm going to plug this sucker back in so I don't forget about it. So once again, I'll put you all down. Alright. And as I described in the paperwork, the 9-pin here, you've basically got 8 of the wires, 1 blank, and we already know the use of a bunch of them. The green one is obviously going to be the ground, the red's going to be your battery feed, black's going to be your positive feed, and orange and light blue are going to be your turn signals, with dark blue being just your high beam indicator. That basically leaves 2 wires, which are the blue with white stripe, and I want to say it is, yeah, green with blue stripe. Now, normally the blue with white is going to be your fuel sensor, or fuel sender, and then the other one is going to be your tach. Well, Xpro wired these bikes backwards, I guess, because the blue and white is actually your fuel sensor, and the blue and green is your tachometer. Found that one out because I plugged in this speedo, and I didn't get a fuel reading, I didn't get any RPMs, I couldn't even get the bike to start. So then I plugged in the old speedometer, pulled the, I believe it was the yellow and white one, thinking that was supposed to be tach, and sure enough, my fuel gauge started blinking empty, and I had a full tank in it. So it basically gave itself away that white and yellow, which corresponded with the green and blue in this one, was actually the fuel, not the tachometer. So then I switched the location of those 2 plugs on this speedometer, plugged it back in, and lo and behold, everything worked. So as long as you factor out the wires that basically fit the more common color coding, which is the green, light blue, dark blue, orange, black, and red, whatever's left has to be the remaining functions on your speedometer, and it shouldn't be too hard to kind of just plug and unplug, guess and check. You're going to be using these until you're sick of them, but that's basically how I troubleshot it to make it work. And as far as the brackets go, hate to say it, but you're more than likely going to have to make your own like I am. Okay, ladies and gents, so as you can see, I've done some rather extensive figures on all this now. What I got here is kind of a map of the main harnesses, the 2 that come on all of the speedometers. There is one other one that I don't have pictured on this little map out. It's the one for the actual speed sensor. Now, that's only got 3 wires on it, and from my experience, if you use the speedometer that I used and you're working with the bike that I'm working with, it's literally plug and play. You want to ignore the instruction manual because this little bugger in here tells you to switch 2 of the wires. You don't. Then you don't get any speed readings, so best to just leave it the way it is. I swapped them back and I got speed readings on it, so great going. But so what we have here for the Xpro 2022 Vader Gen 2, I think it's the BD15, either one, the 2022 Vader. What we have here is the bike side harnesses. First one we got here is the trans harness. That's basically just your shift indicator, and I'm pretty sure that's right. I know that when I got mine lined up after some research, I ended up having to swap the 2 sides plugs. I think I may have drawn the original diagram wrong. This one's a remake. I think I may have just accidentally lined it up with the mirror version, which is what's on the bike side, like it is here. But then I ended up wiring the plug wrong, and it ended up not lining up, so I ended up having to swap those 2 over, which is what you get here with the mirrored image. Basically, you can tell it goes 2 and 2. The basically useless wire 4, 3, so it's basically a mirror image because then when you plug them together they line up, being male, female, female, male, anyways. But yeah, so that was the bike side harness that I got mapped out, and the way I did this was I went through originally looking at a lot of the basic plan outs. Here's one for more generic either China bikes or just Chinese universal speedometers in general. I went through one that I found that most guys specifically pointed to when working with the smaller Chinese bikes, which is this printout. Now this one is actually for the speedometer on an Xpro Fuerza, which is very similar. In fact, it looks almost identical to the one that I bought as a replacement so I could actually calibrate the damn thing. And there's the lineups you got down here. Now, this, along with some online forums, is where I came up with some of the parallels here for with the transmission wiring harness. It usually starts in neutral, and then either goes counterclockwise, or starts neutral down there. It always starts in a corner. And lo and behold, 9 times out of 10, usually first gear is on the top center, which is right there. So if you go off of that, which I did, what I did is I took that, where'd it go? There it is. I took that first wire, which was the pink one, off of the bike side, and then to verify my findings, I turned the bike on, and sure enough, the little gauge readout on the Vader's stock speedo, the little 1 through 4 that cycles as you shift, was blank. And I was like, okay, that's great. So I put it back into neutral, and I got the neutral mark, which is great. That means I didn't pull the neutral wire. And then I went from there and thought, okay, well, if that's one, neutral's got to be one of these two. Lo and behold, I pulled the yellow and green first, and I still had neutral, which was surprising, but then using deductive reasoning, I shifted it up into second, and I got a blank readout again, so I could tell that yellow and green was 2. Originally, I went around that way. Then I found out when I plugged in the new Aftermarket speedometer, I went to go shifting, and along with the fact that I had these mirrored by mistake, I was bouncing, instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, I was going, I think it was second, neutral, 3, 1, 4, so I knew there was something wrong there. But if you basically just disconnect these plugs one at a time on whatever bike you've got, and then check your speedometer, or, you know, rock the bike back and forth and kind of shift up and down, you'll eventually find what each of these wires represents. I have seen that, like, a fair amount of the time. Pink usually is first gear, and then neutral is something to do with green on it, so usually a green primary color, if that helps out. Otherwise, you're just going to have to basically pull each of these little suckers and check it for yourself. Now, what I found to be a lot easier was the main harness here, which is the 9-pin. Now, here's where there's some major differences. Let me get my little booklet here. So, this is the instruction manual for the SAMDO Universal. I love how the Chinese decided, hey, we're going to put it on a tiny little booklet in micro-sized print. As you can see, there's one glaring difference already. The blank socket out of the 9-pin here is different from up there where it's on the very top. Now, if you go through, like I said, you check forums, you check the readout here that's for the descriptors, and then even if you check that Forza one that I had here, and you look at the boxes there are some wires here that you can deduce already what they're going to be just judging by the color. 9 times out of 10 they're going to be the same colors. Now, those lights for me, those wires for me were also obvious because I've replaced the factory headlight with an aftermarket, so I already knew that the turn signal wires were going to be orange in some form of blue, as well as the high beam was going to be something to do with a dark blue. Now, I was right there going through everything. I pulled the orange bulb, I pulled the orange wire, and sure enough, my left turn indicator on the stock speedo didn't function. Plugged it back in, functioned. So I was like, okay, that's got to be right. Looking at the light blue between this diagram with the Forza and the online Honda Grom forum, I figured that basically in most bikes, especially Chinese-made ones, light blue is going to be your right turn, orange is going to be your left turn, solid blue is going to be your high beam, and then obviously you've got the basics, which are the red is going to be your feed from the battery, green is going to be ground, and then black is usually a 12-volt positively. That might be a different color. Some use yellow or red and yellow, but for the most part, these 5 here, the turn signals, the high beams, the 12-volt feed, and the ground, are going to be relatively the same across all fields. So you take that, basically leaves you with 3 wires you have to deduce. If you have the black one, awesome, then you're left with 2. And these 2 are the little buggers. Everywhere else I've read, usually blue and white is your fuel sender, and then yellow and white, or whatever color's left, is your RPM tachometer reading. On the Vader, those happen to be backwards. The blue and white is actually your RPM readout, and then the yellow and white is your fuel. Now, the way I figure this is, and the way I figured it out for our bikes is, I took these harnesses and kind of marked with tape those main 5 that I knew what they went to, those main 6 I should say, and then I pulled each of these wires in turn. Now when I pulled the blue and white one, the bike wouldn't even start, but that I figured, okay, so it's got to be one of the two. And then I pulled the yellow and white one, and the fuel gauge started blinking empty. So I deduced with what we had left, we only had those two options left in the whole panel out for that one, and all the other diagrams for the generics online, like I think it's the COSO clone speedometers and whatnot. I figured the only two options we had left were RPM and fuel. I found the fuel, so that left blue and white to be RPM. Sure enough, I plugged those two in where they belonged, and lo and behold, started the bike up, gave it a twist, and I had the RPM readout. Little bit of a lag, I'll be honest. Just a tiny bit of a lag between the actual rev and the RPM, but really I just wanted it for dialing in, you know, on-the-fly carburetor adjustments and whatnot. It's not enough of a lag to hinder shifting for newer riders, but eventually you get used to doing it to shifting by ear anyways when you hear the pitch of the engine change, and you'll get to that in no time. So yeah, that is the bike side harness, and this is the modified speedometer harness. Now you can go both ways. You can either rearrange these on the bike side, or you can rearrange the speedometer. I chose to rearrange the speedometer because it was easier to get to. You weren't fighting a couple of harnesses that were buried in basically a rubber sock on the inside of the bike. But also this way, if I wanted to ever resell the bike, I can actually replace the factory stuff and sell it as stock. Too many times I've seen guys trying to sell or buying Vaders online used and finding out that somebody did a hack job on the wiring harness. It's never a fun time trying to basically rewire the bike back to factory. I figured it'd help it keep kind of retain its value. Also, if I screwed this up, I could just fake defect on arrival and get a new one from Amazon, but don't tell nobody. But anyways, so originally we had this setup right here. Hopefully this is coming out clear. This GoPro is not the best thing for clear photo, but basically you had all the wires there that are represented. The only difference is on this one, the yellow and black is the rotation signal, which basically stands for RPMs, and the blue and the white is the fuel output, which is basically what I just discussed on the other side of the bike. So the nice thing about this one speedometer is all these colors basically line up with their correct designations, except for the fuel and the RPM. So then what I did is I took those and I rearranged them back to match the mirror of what the bike had on it. So you know, you've got your black, orange, green. On that side you got black, orange, green, and they just mirror each other so they plug in perfectly. Both of these harnesses I had to rearrange a couple times because I kept accidentally wiring them to what I had drawn out to be the bike side harness, and then realizing, oh shoot, if I'm staring at it and I'm seeing this staring at me, and that's what it is on the bike side, when I go to flip it, what's supposed to plug in here is going to be plugging in here. The only two that will be right will be these two right here. So yeah, make sure you're wiring the mirror image. I'll stress that one a lot because I did it myself, and that was probably about 2 nights worth of headache right there. Alright, give you all a second to catch up if you're taking notes, but basically just reroute that, and then we got the gear shift, or the transmission selector harness. That one is going to be a mixed bag for whatever bike you're working on. Most aftermarket speedos have their own wire coloring coding in both aspects, at least especially with the gears. They just use whatever random colors they can think up. This one I basically just took what each gear designation here was, you know, first gear, second gear, third gear, fourth gear. Doesn't matter for a fifth, Vaders don't have 5. And then a neutral gear. And then I basically wired them to the mirror of what I found this to be. So if you haven't already turned me saying the word mirror into a drinking game, I'd strongly suggest you do. If you're planning on rewatching this, it'll make your night go a whole lot easier putting this stuff together. Yeah, so the one thing I found out, the magnets, you don't have to worry about them because the factory speedo the factory speed sensor on the Vader actually plugs right in. You don't have to worry about the tack. Obviously, you just put it right to that one wire and you're good. If you want a more accurate tack, you can get into the pulsar coil and screw with that if you want to. I didn't really see a need to it. And there's the little bugger I was talking about earlier where it's telling you to make sure the wires are in black, blue, and brown for the speed sensor. Don't do that. It doesn't even line up with the frickin' speedometer harness, because I swapped the black and the blue out and I got nothing out of it, but then I swapped them back and hey, it worked. Surprise, surprise, the Chinese didn't know what they were doing. But anyways, And obviously you got some simple broken English on how to set the tire circumference. Once I get the one figured out for my bike, I'll post it for the 12-inch wheels, because I redid this math even with the numbers they've got here using the exact same formula, and I still got a different answer than they did, even after running the calculations to transfer everything from inches to centimeters and blah 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 blah. So I'm basically just going to start at 35, and then once I get a speed test done on this thing, I'll look and see how accurate it is compared to my phone GPS, and I'll basically post in the description down below what the dial-in was for a Vader. And that's basically what you got for this thing. It's all basically a game of guess and check. From what I can see, you can't really fry the wiring anywhere, but it doesn't hurt. I mean, obviously you don't want to be going and sticking the 12 volt into the red feed into the green one. So one way I can see this becoming a hairball is if you accidentally do forget to mirror it, then you might end up blowing the fuse. But other than that, I can't see too much damage happening from this small terminal system. The other thing you may notice, and I noticed it with this bike, is the transmission harness is actually on the Speedo itself a female plug when you actually need a male plug. Now, I solved that solution because I found a set of basically these kind of terminals, exactly the same terminals, on eBay. It was $10 for a tackle tray full of, like, I think 10 sets of 2 pins, 10 sets of 4 pins, 10 sets of the 6 pins. Basically something you want to have around with these, because I can guess with the quality of the plastic I've seen on them so far, they're not going to last very long, especially if you accidentally get like some tar or some gas on them. They'll probably disintegrate super quick. So it probably wouldn't hurt to have, but it also gives you a bunch of those mini spade and butt connectors that you can't seem to find anywhere except on those bikes. So if you ever plan on doing a fender delete or redoing your headlight or something and you need connectors of that size, you'll have a surplus of them on hand.
Alright folks, here's where I kind of started rambling about basically what I've already said about the jump harness I made for the bike, but this is basically what I got for you. It's really just a game of unplug wires and see what's going on. Now, I'll post down in the comments below as I have advancements on this, plus on the few Facebook groups that I'm a part of where this is kind of a big deal. So that's really all I got for you. You know, good luck with your projects, and if you need any help with it, I'll leave a link down below to my Facebook, and if you want to just shoot me a message, I'd be happy to help you out.